I knew that only 4 miles away was my real home, Thrushcross Grange, containing the only people I loved in the world. But those 4 miles were like an ocean which I could not cross. Don't tell Edgar or Catherine this, but I had hoped to find a friend at Wuthering Heights, someone to support me against Heathcliff. Now I realized that no one here would help me. After a long silence, I said, "Please ask a maid to show me my bedroom. I'm tired after my journey."
"We have no maids here," he answered. "Joseph will show you Heathcliff's room if you like. And you'd better lock the bedroom door tonight."
"Why, Mr. Earnshaw?" I asked. I did not want to lock myself in with Heathcliff. He brought out a gun, which had a knife attached to it.
"Look at this," he said. "Every night I try to open his bedroom door. Up to now he's locked it. But one night he'll forget, and then I'll kill him."
"Why do you hate him so much?" I asked.
"Because he's taken everything from me," he shouted angrily. "There's nothing left for Hareton to inherit, but I'm going to get it all back, and his money too, and then his blood. Then the devil can have his soul."
He seemed mad to me, Ellen. I left him and went to find the old servant, Joseph. It seemed that Heathcliff's room was locked, and there were no guest bedrooms, so in the end I slept on a chair in the child's room. What a welcome to my new home! I know Heathcliff blames Edgar for Catherine's illness. He has warned me he'll make me suffer for it. Oh, I do hate him. I'm so miserable. I've been such a fool. Don't tell anyone at Thrushcross Grange about this, Ellen. Come quickly. Don't disappoint me. Isabella. As soon as I had read this, I asked Mr. Edgar if I could take a message from him to his sister. "You may visit her this afternoon, Ellen, if you like. Tell her I'm not angry, just sorry to have lost her. I can't imagine she will ever be happy. I shall never visit her or write to her." When I arrived at Wuthering Heights that afternoon, I was shocked to see how much worse the house looked than when I used to live there. I realized that Hindley did not care what conditions he lived in, and Joseph clearly spent more time praying than cleaning. Heathcliff and Isabella were both in the main room. Heathcliff looked more like a gentleman than I had ever seen him, but his wife had not bothered to brush her hair or change her dress. I had to explain to poor Isabella that Mr. Edgar had refused to write to her. She cried a little when she heard that. Then Heathcliff asked me question after question about Catherine's illness. "If you really love her," I told him, "you'll keep away from her now. She mustn't be overexcited. Her health will always be weak, and her loving husband is a very good nurse to her." "Her loving husband?" repeated Heathcliff scornfully. "Don't compare my feeling for her with his. No, Ellen, before you leave this house, I'll make you promise to arrange a meeting for me with Catherine. I must see her." "I'll never agree to that," I said. "She's just beginning to recover. She's almost forgotten you, and now you want to upset her again." "Ellen, you know as well as I do that she can never forget me. If she thinks once of Edgar Linton, she thinks 1,000 times of me. He can't love her as I can, and Catherine has a heart as deep as mine." Catherine and Edgar are very fond of each other," said Isabella suddenly. "Don't speak of my brother like that."
"Your dear brother doesn't care enough about you to write to you," replied Heathcliff, smiling sourly.
"That's because he doesn't know how much I've suffered," she answered quietly, turning away to hide the tears on her face. "Sir," I said, "it seems to me that Mrs. Heathcliff, I should say, is unhappy. You must treat her kindly. Try to look after her. Let her have a maid, for example."
"I'm not going to be soft with her," he replied with a laugh. "She was stupid enough to run away with me. I never pretended to love her. Now I think she's beginning to realize that I scorn her. She's an even weaker fool than her brother, but she's going to be useful to me. That's why I'm keeping her with me."
"Ellen, he says he married me to have his revenge on Edgar. But I won't let him carry out his plan, whatever it is. I'll die, or I'll see him dead first."
"You're getting violent, Isabella," said Heathcliff. "Go upstairs now. I want to speak to Ellen Dean in private. Go on."
And he pushed her roughly out of the door. "Don't you feel pity for her?" I asked when we were alone. "Have you ever felt pity for anybody in your life?"
"Why should I? She's just like an insect under my foot. The more she cries, the more I enjoy hurting her. Now, Ellen, listen. I'll wait every day and every evening in the Grange garden until I find a chance to see Catherine. If I meet Edgar Linton or his servants, I'll shoot them."
"But don't you think it'd be better to avoid a fight?
You could tell me when she'll be alone. Then there'll be no violence."
I argued and complained and refused 50 times, but in the end he forced me to agree. I promised to let him know when Edgar Linton was away from home. I suppose it was wrong of me, but I hoped it would be Heathcliff's last meeting with Catherine. Chapter 10. Heathcliff visits Catherine for the last time. 1784. Heathcliff had given me a letter for Catherine, but I decided not to show it to her until Mr. Edgar was out of the house. My chance came 4 days after my visit to Wuthering Heights. As it was a Sunday, Mr. Edgar and all the servants went to church, leaving me alone to look after Catherine. She was sitting downstairs by an open window, enjoying the spring sunshine. Her appearance had changed since her illness, but there was a strange beauty in her pale face. She did not read or sew any more, but used to sit there silently, staring into the distance. Her eyes seemed fixed on something far away, something beyond normal sight. I showed her the letter, but she looked confused and could not seem to understand it, so I had to explain. "It's from Mr. Heathcliff," I said gently. "He's in the garden and wants to see you. What shall I tell him?" She said nothing, but bent forward in a chair to listen. We both heard someone coming through the hall. Heathcliff had realised the house was almost empty and had found an open door. Catherine looked eagerly towards the entrance to the room. He appeared, and in 2 steps was by her side. For 5 whole minutes he held her in his arms and kissed her again and again. It gave him great pain to look at her face. He could see, as I could, that she would never recover, that she was certain to die. "Oh, Catherine! Oh, my life! How can I bear it?" he cried. "You and Edgar have broken my heart," said Catherine. "And you both want me to pity you. How strong you are, Heathcliff. You live for years after my death. Will you forget me and be happy with others when I'm in my grave?" "It's wicked of you to say that, Catherine. You know your words will burn forever in my memory after you've left me. You know I could never forget you." "I don't want you to suffer more than I do, Heathcliff. I only want us to be together, always." Heathcliff turned away, his shoulders shaking. "That isn't my Heathcliff," Catherine said to me. "I'll always love my Heathcliff and take him with me. He's in my soul, you see. Oh, Ellen, I do want to escape from this prison. There's a beautiful world waiting for me out there. You feel sorry for me now because I'm ill. Well, very soon I'll feel sorry for you because I'll be beyond you all." Heathcliff turned towards her, his fierce eyes wet. For a moment they looked at each other, and then they were in each other's arms again. No one could have separated them. "How cruel you've been to me, Catherine!" he cried wildly. "You loved me, so why did you marry Edgar Linton? It's all your fault. I haven't broken your heart. You've broken it, and you've broken mine too. Do you think I want to live after you are dead?" I've done wrong. I'm dying for it," sobbed Catherine. "It's your fault too, Heathcliff. You left me, remember? But I forgive you. Now forgive me." "It's hard to forgive when I look at your sad eyes and feel your thin hands. Kiss me again, Catherine. I forgive you for making me suffer. But how can I forgive you for dying?" Catherine sobbed quietly, hiding her face in his shoulder, and tears rolled down Heathcliff's dark face. Suddenly, I noticed through the window the servants coming back from church. I was afraid Mr. Edgar would find Heathcliff with Catherine. "My master will be here in a moment," I warned them. "I must go, Catherine," said Heathcliff. "No, no!" she screamed. "Don't go! It's the last time! Edgar won't hurt us! Heathcliff, I'll die if you go!" "All right, my darling, I'll stay. If he shot me in your arms, I'd die happy." At that moment, my master appeared at the door. When he saw Heathcliff holding his wife, he went pale with anger. "Here, take care of her first," said Heathcliff, putting Catherine in her husband's arms. "Then speak to me later if you wish." He walked out of the house. Catherine seemed to be unconscious, and Mr. Edgar was so worried about her that he forgot about Heathcliff for the moment. She recovered a little, but did not recognise any of us, and was clearly very ill. We put her to bed immediately, and at 12 o'clock that night her daughter, Cathy, was born, 2 months early. That's the young lady you saw at Wuthering Heights, Mr. Lockwood. 2 hours later, Catherine died, without calling for Heathcliff or recognising Edgar. My poor master was in the depths of despair. I thought it was very unfortunate that Catherine had only given him a daughter, not a son. Now the Linton fortune would pass to Isabella and her husband after Mr. Edgar's death. Catherine's dead body lay peacefully on her bed. In death she looked more beautiful than in life. I wondered if she was now beyond us all, as she had said, and hoped that her soul had found a home with God. In the morning, I went to look for Heathcliff. I found him in the Grange garden, where he had been waiting for news all night. "She's dead, I know," he called to me as I came closer. "Don't cry. She doesn't need your tears. Tell me, how did—" He tried to say a name, but could not manage it. "How did she die?" he said at last, staring fiercely at me. "Don't be sorry for me. I don't want your pity." Poor creature, I thought. You have a heart just like other men, but you are too proud to show it. Aloud I said, "She died quietly in her sleep. Her life finished in a gentle dream. I hope she wakes as calmly in the other world." "Where are you, Catherine?" he cried in despair. "Don't leave me here, where I can't find you. I pray that you will never rest while I'm alive. You said I killed you. Haunt me then! Murdered people do haunt their murderers, I believe. Come back as a ghost. Drive me mad. I don't care. Oh, God, I can't bear it. I cannot live without you, my soul." He howled like a wild animal and hit his forehead several times against a tree until the wood was covered in blood. I knew I could no longer help him, so I left him. Catherine was buried the following Friday. Her brother Hindley, although invited, did not come, and Isabella was not invited, so it was only Mr. Edgar and the servants who attended the ceremony. To our surprise, she was not buried in the church with the Lintons, nor with the Earnshaws. She lies in an open corner of the churchyard, where she can breathe the air from the moors. Her husband's grave is next to hers. Chapter 11. Isabella Escapes, 1784. That Friday evening, the wind changed, and brought first rain, then snow. Next morning, the spring flowers were all hidden under deep snow. Mr. Edgar stayed in his room. I was in the sitting room with the baby, when I was surprised to hear a girl's voice behind me. I turned round and saw it was Isabella Heathcliff. I was quite shocked by her appearance. Her hair was loose and wet with snow and rain. She wore a light silk dress and thin shoes, which did not seem at all suitable for a long walk in the snow. Under her ear was a deep wound which was bleeding. Her face was scratched and bruised, and she looked very tired. I could see that she was expecting a baby. "I've run all the way here from Wuthering Heights," she said, gasping for breath. "I couldn't count how many times I've fallen down. Ellen, please ask a maid to find some dry clothes for me, and then I'll go on to the village. I'm not staying here." "First, my dear young lady," I told her, "you'll get warm and dry, and I'll put a bandage on that wound. Then we'll have some tea." She was so exhausted that she let me help her without protesting, and finally we sat down together near the fire with our cups of tea. "Oh, Ellen," she said, "I cried bitterly when I heard of Catherine's death, you know, and Heathcliff is desperately sad, but I can't feel sorry for him. This is the last thing of his I've got." And she took off a gold wedding ring and threw it in the fire. "I'll never go back to him, but I can't stay here in case he comes to find me. And anyway, I don't want to beg for Edgar's help or make trouble for him. To escape from Heathcliff, I must go a long way away. How could Catherine have liked him, Ellen? I wish he would die, and then I could forget him completely." "Don't say that," I protested. "He's a human being. There are worse men than him in the world." "He isn't human," she replied. "I gave him my heart, and he destroyed it, so I can't feel pity for him. But I must tell you how I managed to escape. Hindley Earnshaw should have been at Catherine's burial yesterday, but he had been drinking so much that he couldn't go. Last night he and I were sitting silently in the kitchen at about midnight when Heathcliff came home. Hindley decided to lock the doors so that Heathcliff could not get in. He told me his plan was to murder his hated guest that night, with the weapon he had shown me. I hate Heathcliff too, but I could not agree to murder, so I called out a warning from the kitchen window. Heathcliff swore horribly at me and broke one of the windows. Hindley put his right arm out through the hole with a gun in it and aimed it at his enemy. But before he could fire, Heathcliff caught hold of the gun and pulled it away from Hindley. The knife cut into Hindley's wrist and blood poured out. Heathcliff jumped into the kitchen through the window and started kicking and hitting Hindley, who was lying unconscious on the kitchen floor. I ran off to find Joseph. When we came back, Heathcliff was putting a bandage on Hindley's wrist. Joseph was shocked at the sight of his master and would have gone to the police if Heathcliff hadn't forced me to describe what happened. I had to agree that Hindley had certainly attacked Heathcliff first. The next day, I decided to have my revenge on Heathcliff by telling Hindley that devil had hit and kicked him when he was unconscious. And I told Heathcliff to his face that he could never have made Catherine happy if she had been his wife. This made him so angry that he threw a knife at me, which cut my neck, and then he rushed towards me, swearing violently. I knew I had to get away quickly, and as I ran out of the kitchen, I saw Hindley attack Heathcliff. Both of them were rolling on the floor, fighting. I came over the moors, through the snow to the Grange. At last I'm free, and I shall never, never spend another night at Wuthering Heights. After drinking her tea, Isabella left the Grange. From our village, she travelled by coach to the south, where she made her new home near London. There, a few months later, she had a son. She called him Linton. Heathcliff must have discovered this from the servants. One day, when I saw him in the village, he said, "I hear I've got a son, Ellen, whose name's Linton. I suppose Isabella wants me to hate him. She can keep him for the moment. But tell Edgar Linton I'll have the boy one day. He's mine." After Catherine's death, my poor master, Mr. Edgar, was a changed man. He no longer went to church or saw any friends. He occasionally went for lonely walks on the moors and regularly visited his wife's grave. But fortunately, Catherine had left him something of herself, her daughter Cathy. This tiny child soon won his heart. It's strange, Mr. Lockwood, to compare Hindley and Edgar. They both lost their wives and were left with a child. Hindley did not believe in God and showed no interest in his son Hareton, but Edgar believed and loved his daughter Cathy deeply. Hindley himself died 6 months after his sister Catherine. We never discovered exactly what happened, but Heathcliff said he had drunk himself to death. It appeared that Heathcliff had won Hindley's house, land and money from him when playing cards, so he was now the master of Wuthering Heights. Hareton inherited nothing from his father, and could only stay on at Wuthering Heights as a servant, working for the man who had been his father's enemy. Chapter 12. Bringing Up Cathy, 1797. During the next 12 years, I was happier than I had ever been before. All my time was spent looking after little Cathy, who brought sunshine into our lives. She was a real beauty, with the Earnshaws' dark eyes and the Lintons' fair skin. She wasn't as proud and quick-tempered as her mother, but she was used to getting what she wanted. Her father loved her so much that he gave her everything, and never scolded her. Until she was 13, she had never been outside the Grange garden alone. She knew nothing of Wuthering Heights or Heathcliff. She often asked me about the hills in the distance, beyond the moors, and wanted to ride a pony there. I knew the master would not let her leave the safety of the Grange to go so far, especially as the road to the hills passed close to Wuthering Heights. So I always told her she would be able to go there when she was older. I did not know what she was planning. Mr. Edgar received a letter from his sister Isabella. She wrote that she was dying of a fever and asked him to visit her for the first and last time. She also wanted him to take care of her son Linton after her death. Although my master hated travelling, he did not hesitate to do as she requested. He told me to look after Cathy carefully and left at once. He was away for 3 weeks. Cathy did not cause me any trouble at first. She spent her days walking her dogs and riding her pony in the large garden. But one day she asked if she could stay out the whole day, and away she went on her little pony with her 2 dogs running behind. There was no sign of her at tea time, and I began to be seriously worried. I went outside to look for her. At the gate, I found a workman who had seen her jump the low wall separating the garden from the road and then ride on towards the hills and Wuthering Heights. I was very frightened now. She could be lost on the moors. She could have tried to climb the hills and fallen. I walked across the moors as fast as I could and arrived breathless at Wuthering Heights. How glad I was to see one of her dogs lying outside the kitchen door. I knocked loudly, and Zillah let me in. I knew she had been the housekeeper there since Hindley's death. "Ah," she said, "you've come for your little mistress. She's here, quite safe. The master, Mr. Heathcliff, isn't here. He won't be back for a while." Cathy was sitting comfortably in the kitchen, talking eagerly to Hareton. He was now a big, strong young man of 18, who was staring rather stupidly at her. I was delighted to find her again, but I pretended to be angry to punish her. "Well, miss, you are wicked, going such a long way all alone. I've been all over the moors looking for you. Your father will be angry." "What have I done?" she sobbed, suddenly frightened. "Father didn't forbid me to leave the Grange garden. He won't scold me, Ellen. He's never cross like you. And I've been to the hills, Ellen. This man showed me because I didn't know the way." I made her put on her hat and prepare to leave. "Whose house is this?" she asked suddenly. "It's your father's, isn't it?" she added, turning to Hareton. "No," he replied, looking down. His face went very red. "Whose then? Your master's?" she asked. He swore and turned away. "Ellen, he didn't say miss to me. Servants should always say miss, shouldn't they?" Hareton frowned and looked very angry, but said nothing. "You get my horse," she ordered him. "Hurry!" "What the devil do you mean? I'm not your servant," he growled. "You see, Miss Cathy, nice words to be used to a young lady. Now, come along. Let's fetch the pony and leave," I said. "But, Ellen," she cried, staring horrified at him, "how dare he speak to me like that? He must do as I tell him." "He's not your servant, miss," said Zillah, who'd been listening to the conversation. "He's your cousin." "He can't be my cousin," cried Cathy, with a scornful laugh. "Father has gone to fetch my cousin from London. He's a gentleman's son, not a farm worker like him." She pointed at poor Hareton, whose clothes were old and dirty. I was very annoyed with her and Zillah. Now Heathcliff would hear about his son's arrival, which we had hoped to keep secret from him, and Cathy would certainly ask her father whether she had a cousin at Wuthering Heights. On our way home, I explained to her that if her father discovered she'd visited Wuthering Heights, he would perhaps be so angry with me that he would send me away. She could not bear to think of that, so she promised to keep her visit a secret from him. We heard from Mr. Edgar that his sister had died, and that he was returning soon with his young nephew. Cathy was wild with excitement. She would see her dear father again, and have a cousin of the same age to play with. But when the coach arrived, young Linton had to be carried into the house. He was a pale, thin boy, who looked very like Mr. Edgar. He seemed so weak that I wondered how long he would live. I thought he would have no chance of life if his father, Heathcliff, took him to live at Wuthering Heights. In fact, Linton only stayed one night with us. Later that evening, Heathcliff's servant Joseph arrived and asked to speak to the master. Although it was late and Mr. Edgar was tired after his journey, Joseph insisted, so I took him to the master's room.
"Heathcliff has sent me for his son, and I can't go back without him," he said.
Mr. Edgar was silent for a moment. On his face was an expression of deep sadness. He had hoped to keep Linton with him, as Isabella had wished, but he could not refuse the boy's father. "Tell Mr. Heathcliff," he said calmly, "that Ellen will take his son to Wuthering Heights tomorrow. He is asleep at the moment, and I won't disturb him."
"No!"
said Joseph, banging the table with his hand.
"I must take him back now!"
"Not tonight," answered Mr. Edgar. "Leave the house now and tell your master what I said."
"Very well,"
shouted Joseph as he walked out.
"If he doesn't arrive early in the morning, Heathcliff will come for him."
Chapter 13. Heathcliff's Son at Wuthering Heights, 1797. Linton was very surprised to be woken so early, and told that he had another journey to make before breakfast. As we rode the 4 miles to Wuthering Heights, he kept asking me questions about his new home, and the father he had never seen. When we arrived, Heathcliff, Hareton, and Joseph all came out of the house to inspect the child.
"Master, that's not a boy," said Joseph after a while. "Look at that white skin and fair hair. Mr. Edgar's sent you his daughter instead."
"God, what a beautiful creature," laughed Heathcliff scornfully. "That's worse than I expected." I helped the trembling child off the horse and into the house. Heathcliff took him roughly by the arm. "I hope you'll be kind to him, Mr. Heathcliff," I said. "He's weak and ill, and he's all the family you've got." "Don't worry, Ellen," replied Heathcliff with a smile. "As Isabella's son, he'll inherit Thrushcross Grange one day, and I don't want him to die before that. He'll be educated as a gentleman. But I'm bitterly disappointed at having such a weak, crying baby for a son." So poor Linton was left in his father's care. At first, Cathy was miserable, because she would not now have anyone to play with, but she soon forgot him. Whenever I met Zillah, the housekeeper in the village, I used to ask her about Linton.
"He's often ill," she told me, "and so selfish. He has to have a fire even in summer. He calls for cakes and hot drinks all the time. He only ever thinks of himself. Mr. Heathcliff can't bear being in the same room as him."
Several years passed without any more news of Linton. In 1800, Cathy reached the age of 16. We never celebrated her birthday, because it was also the day her mother died. On this particular day, she came downstairs dressed for going out, and suggested a walk on the moors with me. Her father gave permission. It was a lovely spring morning, and I was very happy walking in the sunshine, watching Cathy running ahead of me. But we had walked further than I had realised, and I called to her to come back. She did not seem to hear me. We were on the moors, close to Wuthering Heights, when I caught sight of 2 men talking to her. I recognised Heathcliff and Hareton at once. I hurried to catch up with her. "Miss Cathy," I said breathlessly, "we must go home. Your father will be getting worried." "No, he won't, Ellen. This gentleman wants me to go to his house and meet his son. He says we've already met, but I don't remember. Do you? Let's go, Ellen." Although I protested, she and Hareton were already halfway to Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff and I followed behind. "It's very bad of you, Mr. Heathcliff," I scolded him. "Mr. Edgar will blame me for letting her go to your house." "I want her to see Linton, Ellen," he replied. "Listen to my plan. It's really a very generous one. I want the two cousins to fall in love and marry. You know, Cathy won't inherit anything from her father. My son Linton will inherit all the Linton fortune when Edgar dies. If she marries Linton, she'll be wealthy. Of course, if Linton dies, then the money comes to me as his only other relation." I was still angry with Heathcliff, but it was too late to stop Cathy entering Wuthering Heights. She was delighted to rediscover her cousin Linton, who was keeping warm by the fire. "If he is my cousin, and you are his father," she said to Heathcliff, smiling, "then you must be my uncle. Why don't you ever visit us at the Grange?" "I visited it once or twice too often before you were born," he said. "I must tell you that I quarrelled violently with your father once. He hates me, and if you tell him you want to come here, he'll forbid it." "Well, if I can't come here, Linton can come to visit me at the Grange," suggested Cathy happily. "It'll be too far for me," said her cousin weakly. "It would kill me to walk 4 miles. Heathcliff looked scornfully at his son. "I don't think my plan will ever succeed, Ellen," he whispered to me. "Who would fall in love with a selfish baby like that?" He went to the kitchen door and called, "Hareton, come and take Miss Cathy round the farm." Cathy was eager to see the animals, and she and Hareton went out. As we watched them through the kitchen window, Heathcliff seemed to be thinking aloud. "I've taken my revenge on his father by making Hareton work for me. I treat him badly, as they used to do to me, and he suffers, as I used to. He's intelligent and strong and handsome, but I've taught him to scorn those qualities. So now he's just an uneducated farm worker and knows nothing of the world. That's how he'll always be. And my son, he's stupid and weak and ill, but he's a gentleman, and he'll marry Cathy, and he'll be rich." Meanwhile, Linton had got up from his armchair and gone out to join Cathy and Hareton. Through the open window, I could hear the two younger ones laughing at Hareton's coarse way of speaking. I began to dislike Linton rather than pity him. When we arrived back at the Grange, Cathy told her father about the visit. He did not want to frighten her, and in my opinion, did not explain clearly enough why she should never communicate with Linton again. At the time, she seemed to accept her father's wish. During the next few weeks, however, I noticed Cathy's behaviour change. She was always writing on little pieces of paper, which she kept in a locked drawer in her room, and every morning She got up surprisingly early to go down to the kitchen. I suspected something, and one day I decided to break open a drawer. In it, I was horrified to find a whole pile of love letters from Linton. The two cousins had been writing to each other in secret for several weeks, and Cathy had used the milkman as a messenger. I told her at once that I knew her secret, and made her promise not to send or receive any more letters. We burnt Linton's letters together. Chapter 14. Secret Visits. 1800. The months passed, and soon it was autumn. Mr. Edgar caught a bad cold, which seemed to get worse and worse. He stayed indoors the whole winter, so Cathy only had me as a companion on her walks. She had become very quiet and sad since her relationship with Linton had ended, and was very worried about her father's illness. One day, when we were walking in the Grange garden, I noticed her crying. "Cathy, what's the matter, love?" I asked. "Oh, Ellen," she sobbed. "What shall I do if Father dies? And if you die? I'll be left alone." "I hope he and I have years more of life ahead of us. All you need do is look after your father and let him see you cheerful. But I think he would be really ill if he thought you loved Linton, whose father would like to see Mr. Edgar dead." "I'll never do anything to worry or annoy Father," she promised. "I only want him to recover. I love him more than anyone else in the world, more than myself." Just then we reached the gate, and I saw a gentleman on a horse looking over it. It was Heathcliff. "Miss Linton," he called. "There's something I must tell you." "I won't listen," answered Cathy. "Father and Ellen both say you're a wicked man." "But this is about my son Linton, not me." "What a trick you played on him. You wrote him all those love letters, and then I suppose you got tired of it and stopped. Well, you've broken poor Linton's heart. I swear he's dying of love for you, and he'll be in the grave by next summer unless you help him. Be generous. Come and visit him. I'll be away all next week, so your father won't be angry if you come." He rode away. Although I tried to persuade Cathy that Heathcliff could not be telling the truth, my young mistress was very upset, and determined to discover how Linton was. The next morning we rode to Wuthering Heights. We found Linton alone, lying on a sofa. He looked feverish and ill, and had a bad cough. "Will you shut the door?" he said crossly as we entered. "It's so cold. No, Cathy, I can't breathe if you kiss me. I want a drink." Cathy poured him a glass of water. "And are you glad to see me, Linton?" she asked hopefully. "Yes, I am," he replied. "But you should have come before. My father swore at me and said it was my fault you didn't come. Will you come and visit me again?" "Yes, Linton," Cathy said gently, holding his hand. If Father agreed, I'd spend half my time with you. I wish you were my brother. Then we could spend all our time together. But my father says you would love me best if you were my wife, so that would be better. I'd never love anybody more than Father, she replied seriously. Sometimes men hate their wives, like your father. He hated your mother, my Aunt Isabella. That's why she left him.
That's not true, cried the boy. Anyway, your mother hated your father, and she loved mine. You're lying! I hate you! She shouted angrily, and gave the sofa a violent push. He fell back and started coughing so badly that even I was frightened. At last he recovered. Cathy was crying in a corner, afraid that she had really hurt him. "How do you feel now, Linton?" she asked after a while. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." "I wish you felt as ill as I do, you cruel thing. And I was better today before you came." His voice was full of pity for himself. "We must go," I said. "You can see, Miss Cathy, that he isn't dying of love for you. It's not your fault that he's ill. Come along." But I could not stop Cathy whispering something in Linton's ear before we left the room. On the way home, I told her I would not allow her to visit him again. "He's a selfish child, Miss Cathy, and I don't think he'll live till he's 20. I'm glad you're not going to marry him." Cathy looked sad. "I'm sure he'd recover if I looked after him, and I don't think we'd quarrel if we knew each other better." "Well, miss, if you try to go there again, with or without me, I'll tell your father." But the next day I fell ill and had to stay in bed for 3 weeks, which was very unusual for me. My little mistress went from her father's bedroom to mine and back again, and looked after us both with the greatest care. But I never wondered what she did in the evenings, when Mr. Edgar had gone to bed, and I no longer needed her. I only discovered the truth on the first day I was able to get up. In the evening, I asked her to read to me, and was surprised how sleepy she seemed. She went to bed early. I felt rather worried about her health, and went to her room an hour later to see if she needed anything. Her bedroom was empty. I sat there in the dark, waiting for her to return. When she arrived, shaking the snow off her shoes, she was shocked to find me there. I guessed where she had been, but I made her tell me the whole story. Every night since I had been ill, she had ridden to Wuthering Heights and spent the evening with her cousin. Sometimes she was happy with Linton when he was cheerful and less selfish, but most of the time she was miserable. However, she insisted that the visit should continue because Linton needed her, and she wanted to see him. Although she begged me to say nothing to her father, I went straight to the master and told him. He forbade her to visit Wuthering Heights again. She had to obey her father, although it made her very sad. Well, Mr. Lockwood, all this happened only about a year ago. I never thought I would be telling a stranger this story. But who knows how long you'll be a stranger? You're too young to live alone for long, and no one could see Cathy and not love her.
Anyway, I'll continue my story. Chapter 15. A Trap, 1800. A few days after the master had forbidden Cathy to visit Linton, he asked my opinion of the boy. "Tell me honestly, Ellen, what do you think of his character?" "Well, sir, I don't think he's wicked like his father, but you'll have plenty of time to get to know him, sir. He's too young to marry yet." Mr. Edgar walked to the window and looked out. It was a misty February evening, but the churchyard was just visible. "I've often prayed for death, Ellen. I've been very happy with my little Cathy, but I've been just as happy lying through the long June evenings on her mother's grave and looking forward to the moment when I can join Catherine there. I haven't got much time left, Ellen. What can I do for Cathy before I die? Should she marry Linton? I wouldn't mind him being Heathcliff's son, if only he loved her and could be a good husband to her." "God will show us what to do, sir," I replied. In the spring, Mr. Edgar was still ill, and he continued to worry about Cathy's future. One day, he wrote to Linton, inviting him to visit the Grange. Linton wrote a long letter back, explaining that his father would not allow him to do that. He begged his uncle to let him meet Cathy for a walk or a ride on the moors between the Grange and Wuthering Heights, as they could not meet in either house. Mr. Edgar refused at first, and Linton sent him several more letters. I am sure they had all been carefully checked by Heathcliff before they were posted. Finally, Mr. Edgar agreed. He hoped that, if Cathy married Linton, who would inherit the Linton fortune, she would at least be able to remain in her family home. He had no idea that Linton was seriously ill. Neither did I. I never imagined that a father could treat a dying child as cruelly and wickedly as we later discovered Heathcliff had done. It was a hot, sunny day in summer when Cathy and I rode out to meet her cousin. We were both shocked to discover that he could neither ride nor walk, and was lying on the grass waiting for us. He looked even paler and weaker than the last time I had seen him. During our meeting, he did not seem interested in Cathy or her news. Cathy noticed this immediately. "Well, Linton," she said after a while, "you don't want to talk to me, so I think I'll go home." "No, no," he cried, getting quite excited. "Not yet. Stay at least another half hour. My father will be angry with me if you leave early." "I suppose we can stay a few minutes longer," said Cathy. We waited, talking to each other quietly, while Linton slept a little. Sometimes he cried out in pain. "Do you think his health is better now than before?" whispered Cathy. "I'm sorry, Miss Cathy. I think it's much worse," I answered. Cathy called her pony, and the sound woke Linton up. "If you see my father," he said, hesitating, "could you tell him I've been cheerful? He'll be here soon." And he looked round in terror. "I'll be here next Thursday," cried Cathy, as she jumped on her pony. "Come on, Ellen." In the week that followed, Mr. Edgar's illness grew worse every day. Cathy could not avoid realising how serious it was, and sat by his bedside day and night, looking sad and pale. Her father's room had become her whole world. On Thursday, I thought a ride in the fresh air would be good for her, and Mr. Edgar gladly gave her permission to see Linton. He was hoping that she would not be left alone after his death. I did not want to worry him in his last moments, so I did not tell him that Linton was also dying. We rode onto the moors, and found Linton lying in the same place as before. He was looking very frightened. "I thought you weren't going to come," he said. "Why won't you be honest?" cried Cathy at once. "Why have you brought me here again if you don't want to see me? My father's very ill, and I should be with him." Tears rolled down Linton's face. He seemed terrified. "Oh, I can't bear it," he sobbed. "Cathy, I daren't explain, but if you leave me, he'll kill me. Dear Cathy, my life is in your hands. Kind, sweet Cathy, perhaps you will agree, and then he won't hurt me." Cathy was no longer impatient. "Agree to what, Linton?" she asked gently. "Tell me everything. You wouldn't do anything to hurt me, would you, Linton? I'm your best friend." "I daren't tell you. My father—" The boy gasped. Just then, Heathcliff appeared. He did not look at Cathy and Linton, who continued talking to each other, but he spoke quietly to me. "Ellen, how is Edgar? Is he dying, as the villagers say?" "It's true the master's dying," I answered. "That boy over there is dying too. I only hope Edgar dies before him. If Linton dies first, my plan will fail." He shouted angrily to his son, "Get up, Linton!" and then said politely to Cathy, "Miss Cathy, would you help him back to the house? He can't walk far alone." "Father has forbidden me to enter your house," said Cathy. "Well, come along, Linton. I'll have to take you home then," said Heathcliff. "No, no, no! Please, Cathy, you must come with me!" screamed Linton wildly. He held desperately onto her arm. Cathy could not refuse the boy, who seemed almost mad with fear. So we all walked the few steps to Wuthering Heights. When we had entered the house, however, I was horrified to see Heathcliff lock the front door. The key was in his hand. "Hareton, Joseph, and Zillah are all out of the house," he said calmly, "so we are quite alone." "Give me that key!" cried Cathy angrily. "I'm not afraid of you!" She took hold of his closed hand and bit it. He hit her violently several times on both sides of the head, and she fell into a chair, trembling. I rushed at him, but he pushed me away. "Cry as much as you like, Miss Cathy," he said. "In a few days I'll be your father, and I'll punish you just like that as often as necessary." When Heathcliff went out to look for our horses, Cathy and I hurried round the kitchen looking for a way to escape, but all the doors and windows were locked. Linton was sitting calmly in a chair near the fire, happy that he was not being punished this time. We persuaded him to explain his father's plan to us. Father is afraid I'll die soon, you see. So he wants us to be married tomorrow morning. You'll have to stay here all night, Cathy. Then perhaps he'll let you go home in the morning. You marry this beautiful, healthy young lady? I cried. You must be mad. And wicked, too. You and your father have tricked us into coming here. And I shook him until he started coughing. I must go home now. Father will be worried already, said Cathy. I love Father better than you, Linton. Heathcliff returned and sent his son upstairs to bed. Mr. Heathcliff, begged Cathy, Father will be miserable if I don't go home. Please let me go. I promised to marry Linton. Father would like it, and I love him. Why do you force me to do something I want to do? He can't force you, I cried. I'll go to the police. To the devil with you, Ellen. Miss Cathy, I'm delighted that your father will be miserable. In that case, you will certainly stay here for 24 hours. You won't leave here until you've kept your promise to marry Linton. Please send Ellen to let Father know I'm safe, sobbed Cathy bitterly. Poor Father! He'll think we're lost. Your father must have hated you when you came into the world. I did at least. And he'll hate you as he leaves it. Go on crying. That's what you'll be doing when you're Linton's wife. He'll make a cruel, selfish husband, I think. Heathcliff took us upstairs to Zilla's room, where we spent the night locked in. Neither of us could sleep. At 7 the following morning, he came to fetch Cathy and took her away. From that moment, I saw nobody except Hareton, who brought me food, for 4 whole days and nights. On the 5th morning, Zilla came into the room. She was surprised and pleased to see me, and told me the villagers all thought Cathy and I had got lost on the moors and died 4 days ago. I ran out of the room to look for Cathy. The big kitchen was full of sunshine, and the door was open, but the only person there was Linton. Where is she? Where is Miss Cathy? I cried wildly. Upstairs, in a locked room, he replied calmly, eating a piece of sugar. We won't let her go yet. Father says I shouldn't be soft with Cathy. We've had the wedding ceremony, so she's my wife now, and must stay with me. I don't care if she cries or is ill. Have you forgotten her kindness to you last winter, when you wrote that you loved her, and she used to come through wind and snow to see you? Now you believe your father's lies about her, and you leave her alone, ill and crying in a strange house. You pity yourself, but you won't pity her. What a heartless, selfish boy you are. I can't stay with her. She cries so much I can't bear it. I can't sleep with all that noise. She promised that if I gave her the key to our room, she'd give me all her nice books and her pony. But I told her she had nothing to give. They're all mine. Or they'll belong to me very soon. And then she cried, and took a little gold case from around her neck. Inside were two pictures, one of her mother and one of her father. I wanted to take them both from her, but she wouldn't let me, so I screamed for help. My father came and ordered her to give him the pictures and the case. When she refused, he hit her on the face and knocked her down and broke the gold case under his foot. He took away the picture of her mother.
And were you pleased to see Miss Cathy hurt? I asked.
My father was right to punish her. But I didn't like seeing her mouth full of blood. She can't speak because of the pain. Now you've made me tired with all this talking. You won't find the key to the room. Go away.
As there seemed to be no chance of persuading him to help her escape, I decided to go back to the Grange as quickly as possible and rescue her later. What a welcome I received from the servants at the Grange, who thought I was dead. But I did not have time to tell them my story. I went straight to my master's room. He was lying in bed, very weak and close to death. I told him how Heathcliff had trapped us, and that Cathy was probably married to Linton by now. Mr. Edgar realised that his enemy wanted to get hold of the Linton fortune through his son. He asked me to send for his lawyer to make arrangements so that Cathy would not lose all her inheritance. I did as he asked, but the lawyer sent a message saying that he could not come until the next day. I also sent 4 strong men with weapons to Wuthering Heights to demand my young lady's freedom. I was very angry when they returned without her, because Heathcliff had sent them away. But I needn't have worried. In the middle of the night, as I was taking some water to the master, I heard a knock on the front door and went to open it. It was my little mistress. "Ellen! Ellen!" she sobbed. "Is father still alive?" "Yes," I cried, "and thank God you're safe with us again." "I managed to make Linton help me escape from the room. Now I must see father." I could not bear to be present at their meeting. I waited outside the bedroom door, but they were both calm. Cathy's despair was as silent as her father's happiness. He died in perfect peace, Mr. Lockwood. Kissing her, he whispered, "I'm going to join her, and you, dear child, will join us." He did not move or speak again. Cathy did not cry, but sat silently by his dead body all morning. At lunchtime, the lawyer arrived, too late to help Cathy. Heathcliff had bribed him to stay away. He gave us Heathcliff's orders. All the servants, except me, had to leave. Cathy, Mrs. Heathcliff now, was only allowed to stay at the Grange until her father was buried. Chapter 16. Cathy becomes a widow. 1800 to 1801. On the evening after the burial, Heathcliff came to fetch Cathy. "Why not let her stay here with me?" I begged. "I'm looking for someone to rent the Grange from me," he answered. "You'll stay on here as housekeeper, Ellen, but Cathy must come to Wuthering Heights. From now on, she'll have to work for her food." "I shall work," replied Cathy.
And I'll look after Linton. He's all I've got to love in the world. I'm just sorry for you, Mr. Heathcliff. You have nobody to love you. You are as lonely and miserable as the devil. Nobody will cry for you when you die. I'm glad I'm not you.
Go and get your clothes, you wicked girl, he said. We'll be leaving in a few minutes.
When she had gone, he walked across the room to look at the picture of Cathy's mother, Catherine, which was hanging on the wall.
Do you know what I did yesterday, Ellen?
He said, turning quickly away from the picture. I went to the churchyard and asked the man who was digging Edgar's grave to open the lid of Catherine's coffin for me. Her face looked just the same. I could not stop looking at her. When the man closed the lid, I broke open one side of her coffin, the side away from Edgar's grave, and covered it up with earth. And I bribed the man to bury me there when I die, next to her, and to take the side of my coffin away too, so that I shall have her in my arms, not Edgar. You were very wicked, Mr. Heathcliff, to disturb the dead. I disturbed nobody, Ellen, and I feel much happier now.
She is the one who has disturbed me. For 18 years she has haunted me. You know, I was wild, almost mad after she died. For days I prayed for her ghost to return to me. On the day of her burial, I went to her grave in the evening. There was a bitter wind and snow on the ground. I wanted so much to have her in my arms again. So I dug down through the loose earth to her coffin and was about to pull the lid off when I felt a warm breath on my face. She seemed to be with me, not in the earth, but close to me. I was so happy that she was with me again. I filled in the grave and ran eagerly home to the heights. I looked impatiently round for her. I could feel her, but I could not see her. And since then, she has played plenty of tricks on me like that. When I sleep in her bedroom, I can hear her outside the window, or entering the room, or even breathing close to me. But when I open my eyes, I'm always disappointed. Slowly, she's killing me, with a ghost of a hope that's lasted 18 years. He was talking almost to himself, so I did not answer. When Cathy came in, he stood up, ready to go. "Goodbye, Ellen," whispered my dear little mistress. "Come and visit me." As she kissed me, her face felt as cold as ice. "Oh, no, you won't, Ellen," said Heathcliff. "I'll send for you if I want you." And together they left the Grange. I haven't seen Cathy since then. Once I went to the Heights to visit her, but I was not allowed to see her. About 6 weeks ago, I had a long conversation with Zillah, the housekeeper, who gave me news of Cathy. It appeared that, when she arrived at the Heights, she did her best to look after her sick husband. He was obviously dying, although Heathcliff refused to call the doctor. Only a few weeks after her arrival, Linton died in the night, with only Cathy by his bedside. Heathcliff inherited all of Linton's and what had been Cathy's fortune, so Cathy is now very poor.
She must be very miserable and very lonely in that dark, unpleasant house. Heathcliff hates her, and Joseph and Zillah don't speak to her because they think she's too proud. Poor Hareton would like to be friendly with her, but she scorns him because he's uneducated. I would like to leave my job here, rent a little cottage, and ask Cathy to come and live with me. But Mr. Heathcliff will never permit that. Of course, if she married again, she could leave that house. But I can't arrange that. Chapter 17. Mr. Lockwood visits Wuthering Heights again.
1802. After hearing the end of Mrs. Dean's story, I made my plans for the future. I decided I did not want to spend another winter at the Grange, and told her I would ride to the Heights to inform my landlord. She handed me a letter to give to Cathy Heathcliff. When I arrived at the gate, Hareton met me and took me into the house. Cathy was there, preparing vegetables for lunch. She did not bother to greet me. She may be beautiful, I thought, but she's not very polite. I passed by her chair and cleverly dropped Mrs. Dean's note in front of her so that Hareton wouldn't see it. She, however, just said aloud, "What's that?" "A letter from the housekeeper at the Grange," I said, annoyed with her. She gasped and tried to pick it up, but Hareton got there first. "Mr. Heathcliff will want to look at this," he said, putting it in his pocket. But when Cathy pretended to cry, Hareton could not bear to make her sad, and he threw the letter down on the table. She eagerly read every word and asked me several questions about the people at the Grange. "Mrs. Dean will want an answer to her letter," I reminded her. "You must tell her that I have no paper or pens to write with. I haven't even any books," she answered sadly. "No books?" I cried. "How can you manage without them in this lonely place?" "I always used to read so much that Mr. Heathcliff decided to take away my only pleasure and destroy my books. I've looked all over the house for them. Joseph only reads the Bible, but some of my books are in Hareton's room. Why did you take them, Hareton? Just because you enjoy stealing? They can't be any use to you." "I think Mr. Hareton wants to learn," I said, hoping to prevent a quarrel between them. "No doubt he took them away to study them." "Yes," replied Cathy, laughing. "I hear him trying to read to himself sometimes, and it's extremely funny. He makes some terrible mistakes." After a moment's shocked silence, Hareton left the room. He returned almost immediately with his arms full of books, and threw them angrily down at Cathy's feet. "Take them!" he shouted. "I never want to see them again." "I won't have them now," she said. "I'll hate them because they'll make me think of you." Hareton picked up the books and threw them on the fire, then walked quickly out of the house. Mr. Heathcliff came in as Hareton went out. He had a restless, anxious expression on his face. "Mr. Heathcliff," I said, "I must tell you I'm leaving for London next week, for 6 months, and I shan't want to rent the Grange any more after October. So, Mr. Lockwood, you've got tired of the moors already, have you? Well, have your lunch with Hareton and me anyway. Cathy, take your lunch in the kitchen with Joseph and Zillah. I did not enjoy lunch with my 2 silent companions, and left the Heights straight afterwards. What a pity, I thought, that Cathy Heathcliff and I didn't fall in love, as Mrs. Dean would have liked. Then I could have taken her away from this miserable place for ever. Several months later, in September, I was travelling to visit friends in Yorkshire. I found myself near Thrushcross Grange, and decided to spend a night there. After all, I was still paying rent for it. When I arrived, I was surprised to find a different housekeeper, who told me Mrs. Dean had become housekeeper at the Heights. I wanted to have a walk after travelling all day, so I left orders for the woman to cook my supper and prepare a bedroom for me, and I walked the 4 miles to Wuthering Heights. As I came close to the old house, I noticed that there were flowers in the garden, and the doors and windows stood open. I could see 2 people inside, and I stopped for a moment, curious to hear a little of their conversation. "Read it again, stupid," said a voice as sweet as a silver bell. "Read it correctly this time, or I'll pull your hair." "You must kiss me if I get it right," answered a deep voice. The man was sitting at a table, reading from a book. His handsome face shone with pleasure, and his eyes often left the book to look at the small white hand that lay on his shoulder. The girl stood behind him, bending over to help him. Her face. It was fortunate he could not see her face, or he would never have been able to concentrate on his studies. I could see it, and I was bitterly sorry that I had thrown away my chance of seeing that beauty every day of my life. I did not want to disturb their happiness, so I went round to the back door, where I discovered my old friend Ellen Dean. "Oh, Mr. Lockwood, welcome back!" she cried. "Are you staying at the Grange again?" "Yes, Mrs. Dean, just for one night. But tell me, why are you housekeeper here now, and not at the Grange?" "Zillah left, you see, and Mr. Heathcliff wanted me here." "I have a little business with him, about the rent." "Oh, Mr. Heathcliff is dead, sir. He died 3 months ago. I manage all Mrs. Heathcliff's business for her. She hasn't learned to do it herself yet, you see." "Heathcliff is dead?" I repeated, surprised. "Well, tell me how it happened, Mrs. Dean." "Sit down, sir, and drink some beer. I'll gladly tell you. His life ended very strangely."
Chapter 18. Heathcliff's End. 1801 to 1802. I was delighted to come back to the Heights, and hoped I could make Cathy's life more comfortable. But she was restless, and complained of loneliness. At first, she continued to annoy Hareton by laughing at him, but after a while, she decided she really wanted him as a friend. She apologised for being rude to him and offered to teach him everything she knew. From that moment on, the two cousins have always been together, studying. Hareton has a lot to learn, and Cathy is not the most patient of teachers. But what they have in common is their love for each other. You see, Mr. Lockwood, it was easy enough to win Cathy's heart, but now I'm glad you didn't try. I'll be the happiest woman in England when those two marry. Heathcliff noticed little of what was happening around him, and would never have been aware of the cousins' feelings if it hadn't been for Joseph. In the middle of our lunch one day, the old man rushed into the room, shaking with anger.
I have to leave! I wanted to die here, where I've been a servant for 60 years. But now she's taken my garden from me. She's stolen the boy's soul, master. I can't bear it.
Is the fool drunk? Asked Heathcliff. Can you explain this, Hareton? I've pulled up 2 or 3 of his fruit trees, confessed Hareton, but I'll put them back again. It was my fault, added Cathy bravely. I asked him to do it. We wanted to plant some flowers there. Who the devil gave you permission? Growled Heathcliff. You should let me have a bit of garden, as you've taken all my land, replied Cathy sharply. And you've taken Hareton's land too. He and I are friends now. I'll tell him about you. The master stood up, staring at her fiercely.
Out of the room, wicked girl! He shouted. I'll kill you if I get near you.
If you hit me, Hareton will hit you. He won't obey you any more, and soon he'll hate you as much as I do. You'd better leave, Cathy, whispered Hareton urgently. I won't quarrel with Mr. Heathcliff. But it was too late. I was sure Heathcliff was going to hit her. He took hold of her, one strong hand in her hair and the other raised over her head. But when he looked into her face, his anger suddenly disappeared, and he let his arm fall to his side. He sat heavily down in his chair and put his hand over his eyes for a moment. We all stared at him. You must learn not to make me angry, he said, trying to be calm. Go away, all of you. Leave me alone. A little later, he went out, saying he would return in the evening. As darkness fell, Cathy and Hareton were busy at their studies in the kitchen. I was sitting with them, happy to see them helping each other so well. I feel they're almost my children, Mr. Lockwood, and I'm very proud of them. As the master entered the house, he had a full view of us 3. They lifted their eyes to meet his. Perhaps you haven't noticed it, but their eyes are very similar, and they are exactly like those of Catherine Earnshaw. Mr. Heathcliff stopped and stared, then looked away. At a sign from me, Cathy and Hareton went quietly out into the garden, leaving me alone with Mr. Heathcliff. It's silly, isn't it, Ellen? He muttered, that I have worked all my life to destroy these 2 families, the Earnshaws and the Lintons. I've got their money and their land. Now I can take my final revenge on the last Earnshaw and the last Linton, and no longer want to. There's a strange change coming in my life. I'm in its shadow. I'm so little interested in daily events that I even forget to eat and drink. I don't want to see those two. That's why I don't care if they spend time together. She only makes me angry, and he looks so like Catherine. But everything reminds me of Catherine. In every cloud, in every tree, I see her face. The whole world reminds me that she was here once, and I have lost her. You don't feel ill, sir, do you? Are you afraid of death? I'm not ill, Ellen, and I'm not afraid to die. But I can't continue like this. I have to remind myself to breathe, almost to remind my heart to beat. I have a single wish, for something my whole body and heart and brain have wanted for so long. Oh, God, it's a long fight. I wish it were finished. For some days after that, Mr. Heathcliff avoided meeting us at meals. He ate less and less. Late one night, I heard him leave the house. He did not return until the morning. When he came in, I noticed a change in his expression. There was a strange, wild happiness in his face, although he was pale and trembling. "Will you have some breakfast, sir?" I asked. "No, I'm not hungry," he answered. "I don't think you should stay outside at night, sir. You'll catch a bad cold or a fever." "Leave me alone, Ellen," he replied. I began to worry about him. He was strong and healthy, but a man must eat in order to live. For the next 3 days he ate nothing. At every meal the food lay untouched on the plate in front of him. He did not look at the food or at us. He seemed to be looking at something quite close to him, something we could not see. His fierce black eyes followed it with such eager interest that he sometimes stopped breathing for as much as half a minute. He did not sleep either. For 3 days he had spent the night in Catherine Earnshaw's old bedroom, and I could hear him walking up and down and talking, calling, crying all night. One morning I managed to speak to him and make him listen to me. "Mr. Heathcliff, you must have some food and sleep. Look at yourself in the mirror. You look ill and tired." "It's not my fault that I can't eat or rest. You wouldn't tell a drowning man to rest when he can see the shore. I'm close to what I've wanted for 18 years. Very close. But my soul's happiness is killing my body." "It's a strange kind of happiness, Master. Take my advice and pray to God to forgive you for what you've done wrong in the past, if you think you're going to die." "Thank you, Ellen. You've reminded me of something. It's the way I want to be buried. My coffin will be carried to the churchyard in the evening. You and Hareton will be present, nobody else. And make sure my orders about the 2 coffins are obeyed. I want no ceremony or words from the Bible. I don't believe in any of that." He spent the next night and the next day in Catherine's room, muttering and sobbing all the time. I sent for Dr. Kenneth, but the door was locked, so the doctor could not see him. The following night was very wet, and in the morning, as I walked in the garden, I noticed that the bedroom window was wide open. "He must be very wet if he's in bed," I thought. "The bed is so close to the window. I'll go and look." I found another key which fitted the lock and opened the door. Mr. Heathcliff was there in bed, lying on his back. His eyes were staring at me so eagerly and fiercely, and he seemed to be smiling. His face and clothes were wet from the rain, and he did not move. I realized he was dead. I closed the window. I combed his long black hair from his forehead. I tried to close his eyes, but they would not shut. Suddenly, frightened, I called for Joseph. The old servant came at once, but refused to touch the body.
"Oh, the devil's taken his soul! I warned him that would happen," he cried. "You see how wicked he is, smiling at death. But thank God, Hareton Earnshaw will have the house and land now that he should have inherited from his father." And he went down on his knees to pray.
Hareton was, in fact, the only one who was sad at Heathcliff's death. He and I were present at the burial. Heathcliff was buried next to Catherine's grave, as he had wished. As we were not sure of his age or anything else about him, there is only one word on his gravestone: Heathcliff. The villagers are very frightened of his ghost. They say he often haunts the churchyard and the moors. Hareton and Cathy will be married on New Year's Day, and they'll move to the Grange. I'll be their housekeeper. Joseph will take care of Wuthering Heights, but most of the rooms here won't be used again. You'll pass the churchyard, Mr. Lockwood, on your way back to the Grange, and you'll see the 3 gravestones close to the moor. Catherine's, the middle one, is old now, and half buried in plants which have grown over it. On one side is Edgar Linton's, and on the other is Heathcliff's new one. If you stay there a moment and watch the insects flying in the warm summer air, and listen to the soft wind breathing through the grass, you'll understand how quietly they rest, the sleepers in that quiet earth.